Are people coming? Okay, it has just started recording. So, well, it's my honor to receive Melissa. So, well, it's your turn now.
So, well, first of all, thank you so much, William, for giving me this opportunity. I'm very happy to be here. Well, good evening, everyone, because I haven't. Good evening, everyone. So let's start again. I'm sorry for my voice. I came down with a flu yesterday, and well, I still have some symptoms, so I may sometimes. So if you need me to speak louder, or please let me know. Okay, so it's a pleasure. It's a great pleasure to be here. And as William said, well, I've been working with assessment for quite a while now. To be honest, almost 25 years. But assessment is always a challenge. So I hope I can contribute this evening with some ideas and with some discussion also as well. So I have actually prepared a presentation that hopefully it won't take long. And then you are welcome to talk to me while I'm giving the presentation and also after. Okay, so let's not wait till the end of the presentation to make a comment or to ask a question. Please feel free to do so while I'm introducing the topic and the ideas. William and we discussed quite a lot on the focus of this presentation because, as I said, assessment is challenging. And assessment, you can look at it from different perspectives. So you have classroom assessment or learning, the assessment of learning, or for learning or as learning. Then you have institutional assessment, and then you have high stakes assessment, or in our area, the proficiency test. So when we talk about assessment, it's a broad. The word assessment okay covers a very broad uh, uh, group of topics and understandings on how to go about our practices. And usually, in education or in language testing, we usually find articles that are more theoretical than practical. And then William and we discussed it. We have decided that this should be more practical than theoretical. Okay, and that's why the article that I suggested for your reading before this class, and I'm happy to discuss that article as well. The authors, they are actually in medical education or health education, and not in language testing or education pedagogy. Yeah. Because, well, why have I selected that article? Uh, on the one hand, because, well, I've been working at UFSPA, or the Federal University, where William is my co-worker. I've been working there for 14 years now. And also because the articles in medical education or in health education, they are more practical, less theoretical and more practical. Okay, so that's why I've decided to suggest that you would read an article on which is written by authors in medical education. Okay, so I'll start sharing the presentation so that we can get a line of discussion here. Let's see. Okay. Can you see it well, or yeah? Okay. I can see you. I can see you. So okay, if you're not, it's all right because I can see you. as well as the presentation. So the idea was to focus on multiple choice questions or MCQs, yeah, but not MCQs to assess isolated items. In our case, in language testing, isolated vocabulary, isolated grammar items. No. The idea here is to talk about MCQs for the assessment for learning and assessment as learning. That's the focus here today. So the idea is that I can contribute with some ideas on how to create or how to design MCQ questions to assess assessment for learning and assessment as learning of our students in our language classrooms. So how to design, to use, and also critique. And use the MCQ questions with the goal of providing feedback to our students so that they can self-regulate their learning and they can also be somehow literate in assessment. So rather than MCQs just to grade our students, MCQs to give better feedback and help our students self-regulate their learning. Okay, so there is a roadmap here, right? So we'll talk very briefly about assessment for learning, assessment as learning, and where MCQs can be used for assessment for learning, assessment as learning instead of assessment of learning. Yeah. Then we'll talk about the item quality. We'll talk about the strengths and limits of using MCQs. So when would it be recommended to use MCQs, when it would not? And item quality. So how can we design good MCQ questions? But MCQ questions having in mind the assessment for learning and assessment as learning, right? And of course, in our classrooms. So how can we use MCQs and how can we design good MCQs to be used in our classrooms to assess the learning, language learning of our students? So very briefly indeed, because as I said, I would like to get into the more practical aspects of designing MCQs. So very briefly, assessment of learning. Assessment of learning is usually our final exams, right? Or the proficiency tests, for instance, this is what they do. So assessment of learning would be the measures and the instruments that we use to judge, certify, or classify or provide accountability, right? So, of course, we have to do assessment of learning in our classrooms. And it's advisable that we do. But the problem is when we do assessment of learning only. That's the main problem, yeah, because then we assess the learning of our students only at the end of a certain process and not along the process of learning, right? So that's why assessment of learning is being questioned as a good approach for assessing learning, in our case, language learning. Assessment for learning then would be when we assess and we use this evidence. So we use the results, we use the demonstration of learning that our students can make by taking a test or by doing a portfolio or by, yeah, so many other instruments. So assessment for learning is when we use the results of assessment to decide where learners are at their learning route, so where they are right now, where they need to go, and how to help them get there, right? So this would be assessment for learning. So assessment practices that help students know what they have learned so far, what they still need to learn, and how they should get there, right? And assessment as learning would be okay. Please, Mayara.
Hi, I don't mean to interrupt. It's just since you said we could ask questions. Could you give some examples of assessment for learning?
Assessment for learning would be for instance, for example, diagnostic assessment, pre-tests that sometimes we do to check whether our students know something or don't know something so that we can plan our classes or we can plan our lessons. That, for example, would be an example of assessment for learning, right? So assessment, these three assessments of, for, and S, we can use a variety. I'm sorry. Sometimes it happens. Well, we can. Sometimes I forget the word. We can use a variety of instruments. So you can use, for example, the portfolio, because portfolio is something that it's an instrument used to assess learning during a certain teaching process, a year, a semester, a bimester, a trimester, for example. Yeah. And then you follow students' productions, you follow what your students are doing in the portfolio, and you use their productions to make decisions on whether you should revise some content, whether you can go ahead, whether specific students need some revision. So you are not going to revise to everyone, but you are going to give some activities to certain students, for example. Um, yeah. And also have an idea. When you have that idea, when you have that picture where they are, then you can make decisions on where they need to go and how you are going to teach them to get there. Is it more clear now? Um,
Yes, it is. Thank you.
okay, okay. In assessment as learning, the literature will say that assessment as learning are those practices of self-assessment and peer assessment. Okay, so assessment as learning are assessment practices that our students, we provide our students with the opportunity to self-assess or peer assess, or in the case of MCQ questions, we provide the students with the opportunity to even design some MCQ questions and then assess those products, whether those MCQ questions are good or are not good, and why are they good, why they are not good, for example, to give you an example. Yeah. So the idea here, the message here is that MCQ questions are not only summative. So they are not only instruments that you should use and that you could use to assess the final product. For example, in a final exam, right? You can bring MCQ questions along your teaching, along your bimester, your trimester, yeah, and use the MCQ questions as you would use, for instance, the activities they produce for a portfolio, for instance, right? So MCQ questions can also be used as an educational instrument, right? And it only depends on how you design, on how you provide feedback, how students take part in uh, uh, answering the MCQ questions, and the opportunities that they are given to act on the results, right? So let's move on. So the strengths, right? So why would they be useful in educational contexts and in language classrooms? Yeah, because for instance, you can have a broader sampling of their learning, right? Um, the scoring is more efficient, grading is more efficient because, of course, it's much easier and much faster for us to correct MCQ tests or tests or assessments or instruments that contain MCQ questions than, for instance, the portfolios or open-ended questions or, yeah. And when they are well written, they can target the misconceptions the students have about what they are learning at that point, right? Whatever it is that they are learning in that point of the semester, trimester, bimester, etc. And if they are context rich, we'll talk about that in a minute. If they are context rich, they can assess the application of knowledge, not only the recall, not only the memorized knowledge, but the use of knowledge, the application of knowledge to solve a problem, for instance, right? Or to say, well, this to make some to apply, yeah, the knowledge they have. Then, on the other hand, yeah, uh, depending on how they are designed, sometimes they can hide some shallow understanding because sometimes the students they get very good at guessing and make guessing the the key. The key would be the right answer, right? So if they are good test takers, they will do that, right? And then you will not know whether they have misconceptions or not about that that content you are teaching at that moment. Yeah. They can also distort what students study because we know that students study for the tests, the the assessments, the instruments that we um, bring to our classrooms, right? So we know that that's a fact, right? And if they are not well designed, they could have that effect of distorting what students would study, right? Um, then I have already said that some students are test wise, which means they understand how to take the test, how to take MCQ questions tests, um, and then sometimes they can guess the right answer, but not because they know, just because they are good test takers, right? So we have to avoid that, yeah. And without feedback, MCQ questions will be assessment of learning. So students need to have feedback on the MCQ questions we bring to our classrooms, right? So for the message here is for our MCQ questions to be effective, we have to have this intentional design and we have to focus on our pedagogical contents. So, and I will get into that in a minute. So, the literature that I read to make this presentation, they talk about, some authors will talk about that the stimulus, which means the question, matters more than the response format, right? So translating that into the design of MCQ questions, um, MCQ questions that are context free or in language testing, MCQ questions that test isolated vocabulary. For example, which of the following is the synonym of? This is isolated. Or which of the following is an example of present perfect in the third person, whatever. Yeah, this is also isolated. Yeah? So when they are context free, what you are doing is you are testing assessment of learning. You're testing isolated items. Yeah. When they are context rich, you are using MCQ questions, for instance, to test reading comprehension or to have an idea of errors your students are making in that content that you are teaching at that point. Or you can also bring some scenarios, and then they can make their choices. They can select the best, the correct choice that is most adequate to that scenario, right? So this would be context rich MCQs, yeah? So in our cases would be discourse interpretation, would be the use of language. So if you are in a certain context, which of the alternatives would represent which of the alternatives represent the best way to say such and such, for instance, okay? Or applied grammatical decisions. So grammar that you teach from a reading or from a listening piece. So they listen, you discuss what is the listening about, who is speaking, to whom, etc. And then you bring about some grammar topics in that listening, and then you make some MCQ questions to test whether they understood the grammar topics applied in that listening uh, piece, for example, right? So if the message here is, if the learning objective is communication and communication in context, yeah, then your MCQ questions should be context rich rather than context free. So rather than using MCQs questions to test isolated uh, vocabulary or grammar items, for instance, you would be designing your MCQ questions to test applied vocabulary and grammar items. For example, considering a certain context of language use. Okay? Then, to move on, so how can they serve as assessment for learning? So how they can help, how the MCQ questions can help us to get an idea of where students are and then where they should go and what kind of teaching do we need to provide so that they can move on. Yeah. Um, so you can, for instance, during your lessons, you can use some MCQ questions, right? That are designed with the purpose of having students demonstrate misconceptions they might have of a certain grammar topic or of a certain vocabulary in context, right? Or of a certain reading passage, or of a certain listening passage, or the use of language itself, right? So when, in which contexts would this language topic be most adequate, and when it would be not, for instance, right? Then also here assessment for learning and also assessment as learning, because you can ask your students to justify, for instance, why the distractors are wrong, right? Because when you think of an MCQ question, you have the question itself, then you have the correct answer or the key, and then you have the distractors. And if this is well designed, you can have your students, for example, justify why the distractors were distractors. That they could be the right answer, but they are not because, yeah. So this would be a strategy that you could use so that MCQ questions would serve the purpose of assessment for learning. They could compare answers, yeah, or they could go back to the question or the reading passage or the listening passage that the MCQ questions are based on, and they could name where the clues are. What information from that reading passage or from that listening passage they have used to answer the MCQ question or the MCQ questions correctly. And also, you could also use then the MCQ questions, the results of the MCQ questions, to, for instance, prepare mini lessons on a certain topic, or have grouped feedback, or have individual feedback, or any other teaching practice, right? That would be, you consider it would be necessary after you have the results of the MCQ questions that you have promoted to your students, right? So MCQs can also serve the purpose of diagnostic assessment. Yeah, and they would be actually, this diagnostic assessment would be assessment for learning, right? To help you and your students improve learning. And then assessment as learning, for instance, you can have your students detect ambiguity in the distractors or in the stem. The stem would be the question, right? Or weak distractors. The distractors are not that good to discriminate, right? Because MCQ questions are about discrimination, but discrimination in the sense of I have three alternatives. One is the answer, and the other two are not. So this is the discrimination that you are making when you are answering MCQ questions, right? Or the questions are not aligned with the teaching goals in that bimester or in that class, because you have your lesson plans and then you have your goals, your teaching goals, and you can ask the students to identify if the questions, the MCQ questions are aligned or not, and justify, right? So you can use MCQ questions also to build assessment literacy, to make your students literate, assessment literate also. You could also ask your students to draft some MCQ questions, right? And you could also ask them to ask to design MCQ questions, I'm sorry, based on language errors that have appeared before in the teaching in your class, in your classes, or in that particular class, that particular group of students. And you can also then use that to explain the misconceptions that they are having about a certain grammar topic, or about a certain vocabulary group of words in a certain context, etc. Right? You can also then ask students to, after they answer, they could classify, for instance, the errors that appear, right? You can use, and then you can use, we nowadays, after the pandemic, after the remote teaching, we have technology for that. So you can use the Mentimeter, the Padlets, you can use that technology, for instance, to help students classify for errors that appear after MCQ questions are applied, for instance, right? Or you can have students help you set a revision goal. So what is it that we need to revise after you have taken these MCQ questions? And now that we have the results, we know what you got right, we know what you didn't get right. So what should we revise right now? Yeah. Or they could also be peer explainers. So you could use the MCQ questions so that they can be paired or small groups, and they could explain, yeah, to one another, why the key is the correct answer and why the distractors are distractors. So they could be right, but they are not. So what is it in that distractor that makes it wrong, not right? Okay. And then, oh, okay, here I would like to show you, I guess this is more clear than, okay, here. I guess this is more clear than my slides, right? So this is an article, as I told you, this is an article, the authors are in medical education, not in language education, but why have I chosen this to show you today or tonight? Because, as I said, the articles in medical education or health education are more applied, yeah? And in education or in language testing, they tend to be more theoretical. So here you have a good figure, yeah, to understand the design of an MCQ question. So the STEM would be the question, what you are asking, the knowledge involved, what do you want to know, or what do you want the students to check if they know or don't know. Then you have the key, which is the right answer, and then you have the distractors, right? So this would be the structure of an MCQ questions. And then you would have the types, right, of MCQ questions. So let me just move this here. Okay. Uh-huh. I guess you see better now. Well, I'm sorry. Sometimes I get confused here. Okay. So for example here, I'm sorry. I guess I need some water. Okay. So for example, you can have what they call single or best response type, right? So single or best response type would be something as simple as, okay, here the example is in medicine, not in language testing, but I guess you can understand, yeah, that you have one question or one, here is not a question, is an affirmative, and you have here four alternatives, and one of them is the key or the right answer, and the others are distractors. Here you can have what they call multiple complexion type. So let me just
Melissa, could you zoom out a little so that we could see the
yeah.
No, you're
Oh,
zooming in.
not on.
Maybe zoom, yeah.
Okay, here.
Now,
I'm sorry.
yeah,
Here.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So here, for example, yeah, you have the STEM is true about vehicle transmission. This is medical education, not language education, but anyway. So you have what would be true about something, and then you have four options, and then students have to choose whether only one or two are correct, or 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. Then you can also have this. Of course, it gets more and more complicated, right? So if you are not very familiar with designing MCQ questions, I would suggest that you should start with designing single or best response types, and then move on to designing more complex types. For example, here, you would have an assertion or an affirmative, and you would have a justification or a reason. Yeah. and then students would have to select whether both are right, or only one is right, or both are false, etc. Right? And another example would be this one. This one is really context rich, because this one you would bring a situation or a reading passage or a listening passage, for instance, and students would have to choose whether which of this would be applied to certain cases. So you would have a reading passage here, and you would have a reading passage here, for example, and students would have to choose which of the items apply, yeah, to one or to two. So here, for example, since it is medical education, you have vitamins and calcium and fluoride and folic acid, etc. And then you have two situations, two cases, and they have to select two supplements. So out of the ones that are here, two are uh, adequate for this situation, for situation number one. And for situation number two, three are adequate, right? So this is a context rich, this is also context rich MCQ question, right? But you can also make context rich MCQ single or best response questions, okay? So and I would recommend that you start from type 1, type A, and then you move on. Okay, so let's go back here. Right, so basically, first you have to make a decision on content. What is it that you want to test with those MCQ questions? What kind of content and what kind of cognitive processing that you want to teach, right? And it is advisable that you teach, that you test one at a time in one question, then one at a time in another question, and yeah. So that the MCQ question that you design will be very, it will be very clear for you and for the students what's being tested by that question, and what kind of mental processing or cognitive processing is being tested by that specific question, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So you should avoid trick items, yeah, because it's about what they know or don't know. It's not um, the pegarratões, right? You should avoid those. Yeah. You should avoid opinion-based items, because it's not about your opinion or their opinion. It's about what they know or don't know in terms of grammar or vocabulary or whatever. Yeah. Uh, the stem, then, I showed you the stem, the question itself should be clear, should be concise, should be focused. Yeah. And it should have one central idea, which is what you want to test with that specific question. Yeah. And then the distractors, you should have one best answer, so one correct answer, if you like. Then plausible distractors, not distractors that, oh, okay, even my 5-year-old child would be able to know that, okay, this is a distractor, this is not the correct answer. So plausible distractors that are related to that content that is being tested by that question. Yeah. The options should be homogeneous. For instance, you should avoid writing one long option, which is the correct answer, and then the distractors very short. Because then, if you have good students that are good test takers, they will very quickly realize that the correct answer is the long one, and then the distractors are the short ones. And so they will be answering correctly, not because they know, but because it's very easy to identify the correct answer. And then So you will not know whether they know or don't know, right? And then you should keep your vocabulary accessible for the group and for what's being assessed by that question. And you should avoid irrelevant difficulty in your wording, in how you write the question or the stamp, right? Then
Just
camouflage.
a
Okay,
really small, really, quick
sure,
comment
sure,
is,
sure.
yeah, it's that, like, you mentioned, like, when one of the options, like, is unusually long or unusually short, the unusually long one tends to be the correct answer, but it could be the other way around. But I mean, like, no options should stand out. This is one of the things we discuss a lot, when I designed, like, larger scale tests, and a couple of times when I designed, like, questions for Enem, like, back in the day, like, quite a few years ago. And the other thing was also, like, if you start, I don't know, have there 4 options, and you start 3 of them with a verb and one of them with a noun. Like, it tends to, sort of, like, point that the one that stands out is the correct answer. And really small things like this that we tend to, or at least I tended to, care less about. I didn't pay that much attention. But in the end of the day, it like, the devil lives in the details, right? So there's small things that end up making a whole difference. Or, like, a lot of, you're like designing a task, and then a lot of options are letter B, or a lot of options are letter C. And things really small and kind of silly things like that in the end of the day can make a bit of a difference, right? Just this, really brief comment.
Oh, perfect. That's what this is about. So here, task wiseness clues. So clues that you give your students, especially for the ones who are good test takers. Yeah, if you have, as William said, if you have a longer correct option, or if you have a very short correct option, and all the distractors are longer, or if your distractors are absurd in the sense that, oh, okay, it's very easy here to find the answer because the distractors, they are very silly, considering what's being asked. So they have nothing to do with what's being asked, for instance, right? Also, you should avoid irrelevant difficulty because you are using your MCQ questions to know whether they have learned or not. So it's not about uh, uh, it's not about being the wisest. Yeah, it's about checking what they know or don't know. So you should avoid hidden negatives, you should avoid double negatives, you should avoid complex syntax, you should avoid confusing formatting, so different formatting for your different questions. Yeah. You should avoid the weak focus, so more than one idea in the whole item, considering the stem, the question, and the key answer, the answer, the right answer, or the distractors. Yeah. Uh, Poor distractors, right? So it's kind of a repetition. Yeah. Especially distractors that do not help you see whether your students are having misconceptions or not about that specific content that the question is asking, right? Uh, and also items that uh, are ambiguous. That when you correct, you are not sure whether they got it right because they know, or they got it wrong because they don't know, or whether other aspects were interfering uh, in while they're answering the questions. Yeah, and you should avoid questions that ask about memorized knowledge or recall. Yeah, so your questions should have a more applied uh, um, aspect. Yeah, so students would have to apply what they know to answer the question, to find, to decide on the correct answer, for instance. Okay. Whoops. Okay. Then, well, how many options? Yeah, how many options? This is always a discussion. There is a long debate. You know, which is best? Three alternatives, four alternatives, five alternatives, uh, an odd an odd number of alternatives, or not? Which is best? So research has shown that three options are enough. But if you're not comfortable with that, you could make four alternatives, right? Five or more would be, it would be very hard for you as a designer when you are writing uh, uh, the distractors and the correct answer. It would be very difficult for you to make good distractors if you have so many options, like five, six, whatever. Yeah. So three options would be enough for you to be sure that students know to discriminate the correct answer from the distractors. Yeah. And this saves you time. It helps you give better feedback, and it helps you design better distractors. Yeah. So the quality of your distractors, they matter more than the quantity. Yeah. So you could have two strong distractors. Yeah. And then the correct answer. Okay. And then an example here, right? So from recall to application of knowledge. For example, a certain grammar rule, right? If your question asks them to label the tense, this would be a weak question because this would just require memorization or recall of that knowledge. But if, on the other hand, your MCQ question asks them to choose the tense that best fits a discourse context, and then when you correct, you have them justify the meaning effect, then you would be using your MCQ questions to provide assessment for learning and assessment as learning. Or, for example, vocabulary. If you have them pick a synonym in isolation, this would be a weak question because this would be requiring them to recall or to use memorized knowledge to answer, right? So you could improve your question by having students choose the option that best preserves meaning in a short paragraph, for instance, okay? Or if you are using MCQ questions to test reading comprehension. So instead of having them recall a detail, you could design a question that would ask them to infer, for example, point of view of that author, or what is the purpose of that reading passage, or to whom is that reading passage directed to, for instance. What is the audience of that reading passage, for instance. Or in listening, yeah, instead of having them simply identify a word, which would be recalling knowledge, you could have them select the most plausible interpretation of speaker intention or of author intention in a certain context. Yeah, just to give you a more applied example, right? And if you want to use as assessment as learning, so have students self-regulate and do self-assessment, for instance, you could have them learn from their errors. Yeah, so you could collect most common errors. Yeah, and then after you collect the most common errors, you could have students classify the misconceptions that are behind that are behind this years, right? And you could also engage them in writing more plausible options if you like, right? Just a suggestion. And again, still in this context of assessment for learning, so you would follow these steps, right? So you would have a short item being the whole of it, the stem and the right question, the right answer, and the distractors. Yeah. So you would ask, and then you would interpret together with your students, because it's about learning. It's not about classifying. It's not about getting a scholarship, for example, or getting into university. This is not what this is about. Yeah, you would give them immediate feedback and some maybe revise, or maybe just give them in some short teaching before or after having them answer the questions, and you would recheck, right? So, okay, I have to rush here. Yeah. And then here you have a workflow if you want to use the assessment as learning MCQs, excuse me, MCQ questions to provide assessment as learning, right? I will pass on the slides to William, and then William, you are free to share, yeah, the slides with your students so they can read, because I know I'm running out of time, so that they can read the slides that I'm rushing on after. Okay?
Nice, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely will.
And this is also very important to have your students become assessment literate. So you can use your MCQ questions and any other kind of assessment to help students become assessment literate. So know what content is being assessed and why is it important to assess that content and not another. Recognizing the quality of the questions and the answers, yeah, and using the evidence to provide feedback, to, as I said, revise or do any other teaching practice, future teaching practice based on the answers to the MCQ questions, right? And then, okay, here I will move on, yeah. And then here you have other here are not examples, but here are how you could use MCQ questions in language teaching, right? So as I said before, if you use MCQ questions to test the comprehension of a reading passage, you can ask them about what is the point of view of the author, or what is the audience, or etc. Or you could ask questions about grammar, but grammar in that context of that reading piece and not isolated items, etc., etc. Yeah. And then you have here a checklist. I'm not going to read it because, you know, it's a long list of do's and don'ts, but I would like to call your attention to avoiding questions like which is not the right answer. Yeah, because this is not about this is about what they know and what they need to know, and not about what is an exception or about what is not right in that context or
And
in
also,
whatever
it's
you're
sort of like
teaching.
tends to test attention,
Yeah.
really, because yeah, it's really easy to miss a not when, or an accept,
Mm-hmm.
or don't, when like most of the questions they're positive in nature. They have a positive construction. It's very easy to miss the odd one out, the one with a negative
Yeah.
construction. So, you know.
Yeah. And what's the point of I don't what's the point of having them find what's the odd man out? Yeah. And then if you do, then you should highlight. Um, you're not, or you accept, etc. And then you should avoid vague expressions also. So your question should be very objective, right? And you should also avoid clues in the sense in that MCQ question, in that item, and also avoid that the answer to the correct answer to that item is also the correct answer for the next item or an item that comes after, right? So you should avoid that, right? Because then again, um, you are not testing what you would really like to test, right? If you do that, so you don't know if they answered correctly because they realized that one question answers that other, or yeah, they really know. So you don't know that. Okay. And then you have the list, so you can read the list sometime after this class. And then another list, right? So I decided to bring you two different checklists for writing your multiple choice items or questions, yeah, so that you can assess the writing of your questions, okay? So checklist, it's a checklist. So have I done that? Have I done that? Have I avoided that? Have I avoided that? Etc.
Oh, that's really useful.
Excuse me?
That's really useful.
Yeah, yeah. And then finally, right, final messages. Yeah, so you should use your MCQs to extend learning, to expand learning, not end it, right? So your questions should be aligned with meaningful language outcomes that you are teaching in that lesson, in that bimester, in that year, right? They should be discussed with your students. The students should get feedback, should get uh, the opportunity of revising if necessary, right? And so your MCQ questions would support assessment for learning and assessment as learning. Yeah, so these three would be uh, the careful design of your MCQ questions, the discussion of the evidence, or the discussion of why is this right, why are those two not right, and having our students also write items and justify certain choices. This would promote agency, and this would promote assessment for learning and assessment as learning, right? And then I would be talking about also designing open-ended tasks for assessment, but I have run out of time. And because I would bring you some examples of the exam, the high stakes exam that I've been working on since 2001 for some time now. Yeah. And how we design open-ended tasks for high stakes assessment. So we use open-ended questions, not MCQ questions, to assess, for instance, 5,000 people in a proficiency exam. So it is a proficiency exam that instead of having MCQ questions or being based in MCQ questions, it is based on open-ended tests. And then I would be talking a bit about it and give you some examples, but then I'm running out of time. So I will just show you where you can find examples of tests that are open-ended and that are used to assess, are used in high stakes testing. So here, okay, this is not in the presentation, but I can give William the link. I can provide William with the link. You have here examples, right, on how to assess. Okay, my internet is unstable. So you have examples here on how to assess using open-ended questions, not MCQ questions, listening comprehension and reading comprehension in an integrated way. So you are assessing. This is a test, an open-ended test that is assessing listening comprehension and writing at the same time in an integrated manner. Yeah. And then this one is for, as I said, listening, and this is a video. So students, not students, excuse me, participants that take this proficiency test, here they are being assessed on the comprehension of listening comprehension of a video. So you have images and the listening. Yeah. And then here it's just listening. So usually interview, radio interviews. Oh, and this, okay, the videos here, yeah, and the listenings and the readings, they are all authentic, right? So they are videos and interviews and etc. that you find all over Brazil. Okay? Because here we are actually, it's a proficiency test for Portuguese as a second language participants who speak Portuguese as a second language or an additional language, as you wish. Okay, so here you have an example of a task that is testing reading comprehension and writing in an integrated way, and another task that is testing again reading comprehension and writing in a level which is a little more difficult than the previous task. So this task here is asking participants to uh, express an opinion and then provide arguments for that opinion based on the reading. So they have to read and they have to make decisions on which information from the reading is necessary for them to express their own opinion and support that opinion, considering what the question here, the open-ended question here, is asking. Okay, so I would actually, my idea was to show you a video and then show you the task and then discuss with you, right? I know the designing of open end, and I would also give you examples of what I do in my language classrooms, but we ran out of time, so I don't have time for
Yeah,
that, but I can
there's
provide
so
you
much to
with,
discuss, really. Yeah. Do you
yeah,
have it in your slides?
excuse me?
Do you have a little bit of that in your slides? Like, can they get a taste of what you were willing to do, like from the slides?
No, then
Really?
I'll provide you with the link where they can
Okay.
find because then and okay, let's see. Yeah. So here in this, it's a repository, right? And then they can access all the tests we have designed from 1998
Until now. Yeah.
until now,
And I
and
and
then they
I
can have
truly I
access. They
truly
can select.
recommend. Yeah, I truly recommend you take some time to take a look at it. Because it's really worth it. I mean, it's top-notch proficiency evaluation, like in terms of, really keeping an eye on the kinds of language use that people actually, do in quite a few spaces around,
Yeah, because, well,
So
basically, very briefly, we are testing language use.
yeah,
So um, how they use Portuguese to express whatever, depending on the open-ended question and on the video they have, or the audio, or the reading. Yeah. And then here it's all available. You have the questions, the video, the audio, and you also have here information on the oral testing, because they are tested. There is a written test, the one that I showed you, and there is also an oral test, which is a proficiency interview. And then you can also have an idea how we go about the proficiency interview. And this is not only the testing of language in use, but it is also the testing of authentic language use.
Yep.
So it, it's all authentic. So you'll see that the videos are TV programs. You'll see that the audios are uh, radio programs or podcasts or yeah, whatever. And you will see that in the oral test, we bring um, current topics that are being discussed here by us Brazilians all over Brazil, and then we have them talk about it, and we support them while they do that. Right. So we support them by providing them with questions and also by being attentive to what they reply and then asking the following question based on what they have said, but keeping in that topic and having them take a stance, so, uh, give an opinion and make an argument, justify their opinion. Okay,
And unless
so
you're familiar with Selfie Brasam, I can assure you it will be different from pretty much everything you've seen so far in terms of language assessment and proficiency evaluation in general. It's really different and really it's really good work. I'm a big fan. Well, so ideally we would have some time for a Q&A, some questions and answers, right? But we would have to stick to a minimum, so because of the time. So if you have some extra time, Melissa, I could open like for a couple more questions or commentaries or things of the sort.
sure,
Uh,
sure.
if I can.
Sure, Mayara.
I don't think I have any questions because it was very clear, but I really enjoyed it. I don't think I have ever thought about multiple choice questions like that, and I don't think I'm gonna do my assessments the way that I've been doing them. I think that I will surely be improving them and the quality of it now. And I really like the idea of mixing up the methods and having them justify their answer. I think that adds so much to it, and especially adding context. Just want to thank you. I really think that made a difference in my practice.
Nice. Thank you, Mayara. Diego has an interesting question there, about the tricky questions, mousetrap, pega ratões. They're common in entrance exams, so why should we avoid it? Like if they will find it in some entrance exams, then should we really avoid it? That's a nice question. I would say that, I mean, if you're preparing for an exam, you're preparing for the exam you are preparing them for, right? So if that's like a protuberant aspect of the exam, well, I definitely think you should spend some time, having they practice on that. That's what I would do. But if you're producing an exam, I don't see very much of a point. But if you were actually designing a test, I wouldn't do it myself. But I do understand that if you're preparing people to test that will have this kind of question, yeah, you definitely, from my perspective, I think you definitely should prepare for what they will encounter.
So it's about the purpose, right?
It's about
It's about the
teaching.
purpose. So if you are preparing for the exam, yeah. But if you're using MCQ questions to assess learning, no. See?
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Because it's not about being attentive or finding the
Mhm.
pegahatão, yeah? It's about demonstrating what you have learned or what you have not.
And I'll say that if you're designing, like if you're, designing questions for a large scale test, I would also say no. Yeah, for like if you have if you
I
ever
would
have a
say
chance.
no. I would say no always. No, it's a big no, but
Yeah,
we know
except
it
for
happened.
this. Yeah,
Yeah.
except for this case. If you're preparing people for an exam where they will be, I think, yeah, definitely. Well,
Here in the chat, I have provided you with my email, so feel free to get in touch if you like, and also the link to the Self-Ibras exam. This is the exam that I've showed you, the open-ended tests exam that I briefly talked about and showed you right in the end of our of the presentation.
thank you very much, Dr. Melissa Fortes. Really glad to have you here. And as far as I'm concerned, I've been doing this every semester, and it's been a high point of the semester. People have joined and they have enjoyed and they have made very good comments about this sharing moments. So thanks a lot. Somebody else raised their hand. They I think it was by mistake. I think they were just trying to give you a round of applause, which I will
So, well,
do
thank
as
you
well.
very, very much.
Not finding applause, so I'll just give you a hat, a party hat.
Thank you very much. I'm
Thank you,
sorry
thank you.
that I have used longer than I should, but as you know, assessment is always complex, and yeah, so there is a lot to say, and it's very difficult to focus when you talk
Yeah.
about assessment. But that's what I've tried to do, and
Mhm,
yes,
mhm.
I guess
But I do think because people can find a quality example of open-ended questions around. They exist.
Mhm.
But I do think the kind of light that you shed on MCQ, it's pretty unique, because I mean you do have a lot of bad MCQs around. So
Yeah.
anywho, well,
So
thanks a lot.
So I'll give you, okay, William, I'll give you access to a folder in which there is the presentation and the articles that I read to prepare
Okay,
this
nice.
presentation.
I'll,
Okay, and
I'll,
then you can
I'll
share with your students.
yeah, I'll share it with them, as well as your email and the link to Selpibras repository, but only tomorrow because I'm starving.
No,
I
okay.
need my
Thank
dinner. I
you.
need my dinner
Thank you.
tonight.
Bye.
And
Thank you.
thank
Bye.
you
Have a
very
good
much.
Good night.
Thanks
semester.
all for coming.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.